Okay, so hey guys, welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Paul versus Tyson fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like video if you do indeed like video, and let's get straight into it. So going into this fight, Paul is 10-1 with 7 KOs and Tyson is 50-6 with 44 KOs. This fight is an 8-round fight in the heavyweight division. Paul's last fight was a win via TKO in round 6 versus Perry, and Tyson's last fight was a loss via stoppage in round 6 versus McBride in 2005, that being his last professional contest. Tyson is 58 and Paul is 27. And to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, this realistically hasn't been done before. Perhaps it's been done at a certain level, but it's never really been put on a stage like this before. Paul is always doing different things. You never kind of know what route he's going down. I mean, at one point he was, fighting YouTubers. Then he went on to fight different kind of sports people. Then he went on to fight retired MMA fighters. Then he went on to kind of go down a route where he would build himself up and be on the undercards of his other fighters and kind of like I say, build himself up against other lesser known fighters to then be able to kind of warrant a deserved title fight of some sort. But now he's had this opportunity to fight Tyson. I mean, realistically, he's had a lot of backlash. He doesn't really care about it, and I don't really think Tyson does either. I mean, it is going to be both of them making a lot of money, and so, like I said, I don't think they care about it. And I think if you were to ask anybody in his position if you were, willing to fight Mike Tyson, you probably would say yes. I mean, if you're actually willing to, if you're not too afraid to fight him or anything like that, if you are willing to fight him and you get given the amount of money that you would say yes, even if you would get the backlash that Jake Paul's gotten for this. So, like I say, it's a weird one to see. I mean, in general, they have these alternate rules, which I think is realistically a good thing. I mean, the 14-ounce gloves and the 2-minute rounds, and it being an 8-round fight, and even though this is technically a professional contest, which is in general surprising to see when it was first talked about, first announced. I mean, it was talked about quite a few years ago. It was rumored that Logan Paul could have went up against Mike Tyson, and Tyson could have gone up against, of course, Jake Paul. And like I said, this was talked about a few years ago, but when it was actually talked about it actually happening, I was thinking, oh, it's going to be an exhibition. It's going to be similar to that of the Roy Jones fight. It's going to play out, boring, and realistically, you don't know if Mike Tyson was allowed to go 100% versus Roy Jones. I mean, you could argue that he was only really allowed to go to the body and wasn't really allowed to go any heavy shots to the head, and so that wouldn't have surprised me. But like I say, it was just surprising to see that this fight is a professional contest. Like I say, the rules were being a bit different. I think in general, I don't really mind it being a bit different. I don't think I agree with the whole thing of a 58-year-old being in the ring. I mean, realistically, not too long ago, we saw Razor Ruddock in the ring versus I can't remember the name he was in against, but it was another heavyweight who was around at Tyson's time. I think he might have fought Tyson, and this was out in Jamaica or some other country, and it was a weird fight. It was a slow paced fight. It was a boring kind of spar type fight where both fighters just looked weak and just looked unable to really kind of do the things that they once were able to. James Toney, my apologies, that's who it was. So Ruddock versus Toney, and yeah, it was weird. So I don't really like seeing these kind of older, like much older fighters coming back from the 90s and fighting, because realistically it's not good for the body. Tyson has been through a lot of fights and has been through some tough fights and taken some big shots, and in the heavyweight division you're going to take big shots. And when you see what happened to the likes of Muhammad Ali, he obviously, when he was in later life, it was sad to see because of the positioning that he was in and the kind of limited abilities he had in him. And you got to think, you got to protect these type of fighters from the 90s. These legends like Mike Tyson, he's one of the biggest names ever to fight in combat sports. And if something happens in this fight, if Paul knocks him out really badly, being almost 60 years of age, your body's not going to be ready to compute that. Your body's not going to be made to compute that. And so, yeah, it's going to be everybody's going to be rooting for Tyson to win and to probably knock out Paul in the old kind of fashion style in which he used to fight. And I think in general, I'm just going to be rooting for a safe fight. And, a lot of the times, boxing isn't that. You want to see the violence. I love seeing the violence, the kind of beautiful violence of the sport. But, for this fight, I would like to see a safe fight, especially for Tyson as well. Of course, like I say, the age he's at, he's been seen walking around with a walking stick. I mean, he's had injuries in the lead up. I mean, this got postponed, and Paul fought Perry because it got postponed because of Tyson's flare up with previous injuries, and I think he's still under investigation just this week for different kind of injuries and different problems that might come up because of his age. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to first of all see if we even still get the fight and if it actually still goes ahead, and second of all to see, like I say, if it all goes safely and if it all goes well. Obviously, like I say, Tyson fought not too long ago against Roy Jones, and that was back in 2020. It was during COVID. I remember it was, a quiet arena and no fans were allowed, and it was a big event at the time. A lot of people watched, mainly a lot of the time just because there wasn't any other sports going on. That was one of the main boxing kind of things happening, and even though it was an exhibition fight and it ended in a no contest, and like I say, it was a fight in which you would probably say Tyson won that fight, and through sheer aggression, he looked good. He didn't look bad at points. Like I say, he still looked like he was able to fight a match somebody like a Jones Jr. But like I say, Jones Jr. was at a similar age, and it was a similar time for both fighters. Tyson hadn't fought in a long time previous before that. Like I say, before that was the McBride fight, and Jones Jr. had fought not too long before that, I believe, in an exhibition as well, or if not professionally. So he hadn't had as long out of the ring, but Tyson still didn't look bad. Like I say, I still think he won. And if you remember, on the undercard of that fight was Paul versus Robinson, and if you remember what happened in that fight, Paul absolutely knocked out Robinson in clean fashion, aggressive kind of fashion, and that was a brutal knockout. And perhaps that was what put Paul on a stage in which he's at now and has really elevated him. So in general, he should be thanking Tyson for letting him be on the undercard, and in general taking him to where he's up to now. And it was crazy to think that Paul was even on the undercard of a Mike Tyson fight, and a lot of people were against that happening. Let alone 4 years down the line, Paul having a 10-1 record and fighting Mike Tyson in that next fight in a professional fight. Like I say, it's unheard of, and it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, like I say, Netflix getting involved into combat sports now. I think that's also something that's interesting, but perhaps it will be a good thing. I mean, I don't believe that this is a pay-per-view. It's just going to be, if you have the subscription, then you can watch it. And if that's the way that they want to go, then that's excellent. I would love to see that. I think licenses like DAZN, they have been charging quite a lot, and same with UFC. They've been charging quite a lot with pay-per-views. His Excellency has come in and said that he wants to lower the price of pay-per-views, which I think is excellent. But Netflix coming into combat sports with big events like this, where they're a bit unconventional of events, but he doesn't want to charge. They don't want to charge a lot of money. They don't want to. They just want the spectators to have that entertainment, and I'm sure they're going to get a lot of views and probably going to get a lot of money for this fight in general. And I mean, with a stacked undercard, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, with huge names on it, pretty much only big names on the undercard. I mean, you can think about like the Goyat versus Nunes fight. That's a big influencer type fight where it's two guys who have a big following and are representing their countries for that fight. But then also you got the likes of Bruce Carrington and some other fights in which I'm going to talk about, which are all big fights as well on the undercard as well. So like I said, it seems like Netflix coming into the sport, they're starting on a great point, and I'm sure that they wanted to do that. And it's just going to be interesting to see how they kind of progress on and how they move on, and if they're able to I'm sure this is going to be a huge success for them. And if they're able to carry on things like this, I'm sure not every event they're going to be able to put on is going to be at the scale of this one. So if they are wanting to carry on with these combat sports events or just sports events in general, what kind of size events they're going to get involved with, and if they're going to kind of plateau at any point, and go through the difficult things that all kind of broadcasters have to deal with at times. But like I say, speaking about the undercard, the great stacked undercard, which in general is arguably got fights better than the main event in my opinion. I mean, also on this card is Taylor versus Serrano too, which is main event worthy. It's sold out Madison Square Garden already. It's a huge fight the second time round. It's a fight in which we've been waiting for a long time. It is arguably, probably is, you can't really think of anybody else, the biggest women's fight around at the moment. The best versus the best realistically, pound for pound, probably top two, if not top three if you put Clarissa Shields in there as well. Women's fighters, and they're going up against each other for a second time after absolute war of a fight the first time, which ended in dramatic fashion, where in that last round Taylor could have got dropped, and if she did that, she would have lost it. And Taylor also got hurt in round 5, but Serrano wasn't able to capitalize. But then Taylor was able to move around, have success into the later rounds, where she had a little bit of success to start off with, but then, like I say, into the later round, she was able to have that second wind, keep moving around, have the faster hands, and just be too much for Serrano in the end. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out a second time round. Like I say, it's a fight in which we've both been wanting for a long time, and Taylor has kept relatively busy. I mean, she's had them fights versus Chantel Cameron, which definitely could have took a bit out of her career, and she obviously had the loss versus Chantel Cameron, which perhaps put this Serrano rematch in jeopardy. Maybe, probably not. But then she went and avenged that again in the majority decision. Both of them fights being very close fights, both of them being war type fights. Perhaps that's taken a bit out of her, whereas Serrano has gone down a bit of a different route. I mean, she had a war versus Erica Cruz. Other than that, she's had a few fights, I believe 3 or 4 other ones as well, and they've been perhaps against, still world level opposition, but perhaps a bit lesser opponents. And she's, like I say, kept busy with Most Valuable Promotions, and is now perhaps bought herself as an even bigger name, and perhaps this is going to even sell even better, even though it's not being talked about as much as I don't think it was in the first time. It should be more, but because it's on the undercard, it's not being talked about quite as much. Obviously, this fight's for the IBF, IBO, WBC, WBA, and WBO World Super Lightweight titles. It's Serrano moving back up. It's, of course, undisputed titles on the line. I think that Serrano is going to win via majority/split decision. I think it's going to be a very close fight again. I just think that Serrano is still looking as good as ever. I think Taylor, like I say, has been through a few. Sorry about that. Recent wars in, like I say, recent times, and I think that might have affected her a bit. I think she's not going to be able to stand and trade with Serrano and be able to do it like that. She's going to have to continue to move around and can't just stand and trade like she did versus Cameron as well. I think she's going to have certain success, like I say, with the hand speed and the movement again, but I think Serrano is going to be able to perhaps cut off the ring a little bit better, and also perhaps not get as frustrated. I think she understands what Katie Taylor's about a bit more now, and I think, like I say, she's just going to nick it, as well as it being in her home country as well. It was, I suppose, maybe lucky to an extent that Taylor got the decision in her way the first time, with the judges not going biased towards Serrano. I think Serrano's going to nick it in a close fight again, and it's one of them fights where every so often you see two fighters who are just so evenly matched that every time they fight, it's going to be a war. It's going to be a great fight, and these two women's fighters are excellent fighters, both of them. They're two of the best, like I mentioned. And like I say, I think every time that they're going to fight, even if they make it a third time, it's going to be an excellent, but probably close fight again. And like I say, this time I think Serrano's going to get it in another close decision, and then it's 1-1. They probably will make it a third time, especially as it is such a huge spectacle as well. Also on this card, there's Barrios versus Ramos for the WBC World Welterweight title. It's an interesting fight. It's a fight in which Barrios has been looking good, but I think this is a bit of a step down in opponent. Obviously, Ramos has had losses in recent times. He's coming off a win, but before that had 2 losses, one of them being versus Ugas, and Barrios beat Ugas, and Ramos is a tough fighter. Barrios is improving as a fighter. I think it's going to be an interesting contest. The welterweight division at the moment is in an interesting position. There's not really too many huge fights to be there to be made. Ennis, I think, is going to move up into super welterweight and probably fight a Virgil Ortiz. So then, otherwise, you look around and you've got Conor Benn calling for Barrios. That could be a big fight, but Ben, you never know what's happening with him. He wants to also fight Chris Eubank Jr. He probably also wants to fight everybody. Stanionis is a big fight, but not a big name. Norman Jr. is a relatively big fight. Another one of the champions, but was kind of seemingly ducking the Ennis fight. So, like I say, it's an interesting position for the welterweight titles at the moment. It's not as stacked a division as it once was. So I don't blame them for making this matchup. Like I say, I don't think it's a bad matchup. Ramos has been able to have success and have wins in his career where they have been surprising and kind of against the odds. I mean, that Figueroa Jr. win at that point in his career was, yes, he was coming off a loss, but that was still a good win for Ramos. And like I say, he's fought some of the top guys for a long time in his career. I mean, he even fought Prograis back in, I think, 2015, 2016. So he's been able to fight a lot of the top guys during his career. I think Barrios, like I say, is going to win via unanimous decision. I think Barrios might even get dropped in this fight, but I think he's going to be able to do the better work. I think he's going to be the more explosive fighter. I think into the later rounds he's going to be able to damage Ramos with his jab. He's got a good jab, which I'm a fan of. Like I say, I think defensively he is vulnerable, and a flash knockdown going towards Ramos would not surprise me. But inevitably, in the end, I think Barrios is going to win a fight in which, he does enough, and it's one of them fights where maybe similar to Ennis in just this last weekend, where he performed well, but he didn't perform like standout well. And I think it's going to be another one of them fights again. But I do think Barrios is then going to go into a big fight, whoever that may be, whether that be in the welterweight division or not, whether that be in the one of the champions or not, whether that be Conor Benn or not. I think he will go on to then fight for a big fight afterwards, in which I think realistically should. I mean, there was even talks about him fighting Pacquiao, and so I don't necessarily know what that happened. That seemingly gone quiet as quick as it kind of came about in the first place, and so perhaps that might happen. I think there is going to be a big thing next for Barrios, and I think him getting involved with Netflix and Most Valuable Promotions is probably going to benefit his career in the long run. And I think in general, like I say, what Most Valuable Promotions are doing are going to benefit their fighters. The likes of a Barrios, the likes of a Carrington. It wouldn't surprise me if they perhaps go onto the MVP type side and join on with them, because they know that the spectacles now are so big, the shows are so big, and they're moving really fast as that kind of more modern style promotion in which aren't afraid to take risks, but also have a big back in, have a big funding, have a kind of vocal point in Jake Paul doing such good things. Like I say, it wouldn't surprise me if big names start going towards him. And the final fight in which I'm going to speak about is Green versus Wat Paul for the vacant WBO World Super Middleweight title. Uh, Perhaps it's an intriguing fight. I mean, Green versus Cruz Dezern was an awful fight, to be honest. I don't think either of them looked good. Cruz Dezern looked like she wasn't even that bothered being in there. She was just kind of lumping in big shots every so often. It looked slow, it looked sloppy. Green was never able to get her counters going, never able to kind of show that she was the younger fighter. I don't even think Cruz Dezern went into that fight thinking that she could win. She was coming off the loss versus Marshall, and yeah, it was just a weird fight. Obviously, she then went on to lose that. Now she's getting this second opportunity for a world title. She's had a win since then. She's not a bad fighter, but I think she has to improve a lot of things. I think versus Wat Paul really hasn't taken a step up, really isn't an amazing type fighter either, isn't going to be as physical, isn't going to be as sloppy, isn't going to make it as messy as what Cruz Dezern did. Perhaps she is an easier option for a world title fight, compared to the likes of a Savannah Marshall or Cruz Dezern again. For this vacant title, it is perhaps them taking an easier option. I think that Green's going to win via TKO in round 7. I think she's going to be able to get the stoppage against, like I say, a Wat Paul who's inexperienced, isn't going to be as physically strong, and perhaps is going to still want to have a fight, a close range fight. And I think Green's going to have success through that. And I think it's probably going to be a messy, sloppy stoppage. But nonetheless, I think she is going to do enough to win via stoppage in round 7. Going back to the main events though, Paul as a fighter, I think he can fight on the front foot and the back foot well. I don't think he's a bad boxer. I think he's definitely improved in recent fights, and like I say, perhaps certain fights in which he had has benefited him, and a certain amount of time he's taken has benefited him. And I think that win versus Perry was a good win for him. Like I say, he can fight on the front or the back foot. I think versus Perry, he was able to fight on the back foot well, and Perry didn't really do too much on the front foot, wasn't really able to capitalize upon anything. But I still think Paul moved well and kind of limited the options for Perry. He's got a solid jab, and in general, he sets up a lot of his work off the jab relatively well. You know, sometimes he sets up a shot and throws it, and you can tell it's a little bit of a sloppy throw, a lazy throw, a shot that's not really seen as too comfortable from what it looks like from Paul's side. But in general, a lot of his work is set up well off his jab. He's got that solid timing, and of course, we've seen that on multiple occasions, his timing being good. Obviously, when you think about the Nate Robinson fight, like I said, Ben Askren fight, Tyron Woodley fight. There's been various occasions, even against Anderson Silva when he dropped him, there's been various occasions where his timing, his accuracy has been good at a mid-range, and then he's been able to land knockdowns as a result of it. And also the fact he does have power in his punches as well. Obviously, he's been gradually moving up into the heavyweight division, so perhaps he's going to be the less comfortable out of the two of these at the heavyweight division. I think he is slowing down a little bit as a result of it. Obviously, he's not the most natural of heavyweights. I think it is a big weight for him to make. I think that's going to perhaps affect his power a little bit and perhaps affect his speed as well. And I did think he was getting tired versus Perry, but in general, if that power is able to carry, then it could be an interesting thing. He changes levels well. He can deal with aggression. We've kind of seen that. Nobody's got that aggression like that Mike Tyson aggression, but he can seemingly still deal with a relatively high level of aggression, and that's kind of been shown through the Nate Diaz fight, or like the Perry fight. Even in that last fight, there was that aggression coming against him, and he was able to handle that relatively well. He doesn't fight at opponent's pace, which is nice. Perhaps he's not fighting at the fastest of paces, but he doesn't fight at opponent's paces, and he's kind of seemingly is able to set the pace himself. He has that good, like I say, mid-range accuracy. He moves relatively well, and he is physical. So I think I don't know if he's going to be able to match the physicality of Tyson, but he is going to try. Negatives about him, I think he can be messy in close exchanges. I think his accuracy goes in close exchanges. I think he wastes punches and smothers his work in close quarters, and that's been shown at multiple times where he's been able to try and get fighters out of there, but has just been wasting shots, being messy, forcing the stoppage too much, and then it does look a little bit more amateur in that aspect. He drops his guard. I think he squares up his feet, and so does Tyson. They're both quite big targets there to be hit a lot of the time. He often leans back with his head on the line or his chin in the air a bit at times. He stays in range a bit too long, and like I said, these things, if Tyson is able to turn back the clock, that's kind of what we're all waiting to see. If he's able to do that, he might be able to punish Paul if he puts his head back on the line, or has his head on the line, leans back. If he gets caught with a big overhand, it's going to be how he's going to be able to deal with that. His chin hasn't really been tested a crazy amount, so that's something that's everybody's eager to see. Like I said, I think he can tire. I don't think his hand speed is anything excellent, and I was quite surprised with Tyson's speed versus Jones Jr. So, like I say, they might have similar levels of speed. He is perhaps a bit more flat-footed. He takes shots. He can be messy. He overcommits. Working off his front foot is something that I don't think he's excellent at doing either. And to speak about Tyson as a fighter, of course, if you kind of know about the Tyson legacy, he's aggressive, forceful, powerful, imposing, explosive. He's hard to control. They're the main aggressive things that just made him so hard to deal with. He was able to close the range just so well. He had that fear factor about him. I still think perhaps he has that still. I mean, I've heard him speaking in the build-up for this fight, and he seems like he's locked back into like an old mindset that was the old Tyson mindset that, in his words, he doesn't really like because it's too angry, it's too aggressive. If anybody else is saying that, perhaps you're saying it's a bit cringe, but from Tyson, you respect it, and it's going to be interesting to see if this is just talk or if it's actually the truth. And I don't think we saw that too much against Jones Jr. But if it was limited, then perhaps he wasn't allowed to, and he still looked aggressive. You could still hear him grunting every time he threw, and like I say, that fear factor is definitely still there. Like I mentioned, he's able to close the distance well. He's got that good body work. He's got them front foot counters at the same time, which he's able to land as well. He doesn't seemingly smother. I mean, Jones Jr. was tying up a lot against him because I think he was getting hurt with the punches he was throwing, but he doesn't seemingly smother his work, Tyson. He I think he's more impactful in exchanges. If Paul is going to exchange with him, I think Tyson is going to probably be the more impactful one, unless he hurts Tyson Paul. I think he cuts off the ring well, and working around him, I think he's good at. I think he can move around his body still well. So if you're moving around him, I think he can still move with you relatively well. Negatives about him, I think his chin over time might have been hurt a bit more, and he does, of course, rush in. So if Jake Paul is able to time a shot with the timing and accuracy that he has, he might be able to hurt Tyson in that aspect. And it's no surprise if the chin isn't what it used to be, if he isn't able to take shots as well as what he once was because of his age. Of course, he can he keep up is a question in which a lot of people have to ask. I'm sure will be fighting probably at a bit of a slower pace. I think perhaps he may have slowed down a little bit even from that last fight of his. He squares up. Obviously, he's a big target. He doesn't really use his jab, but perhaps he never really did too much. But he definitely does less now. I think he's a bit more predictable in his work now that he's going to get in close, and that's what you have to expect for. He comes in quite open. He can be frustrated. I don't think he sets up his shots. I think against movers, perhaps if you can time when he's coming in, you might be able to move him out of the way and kind of El Matador him, and you might be able to have success there, and that might be able to make you look like the superior fighter out of the two. I think his accuracy at times isn't amazing, and he can be timed, like I said. Paul is the favourite for this fight from what I believe. I don't necessarily know for sure. I think that Paul's going to win via unanimous decision. I think he perhaps might be able to hurt Tyson coming in at one point, but I think a lot of the time he's going to be on the back foot, retreating, kind of picking shots off. Tyson's going to be trying to walk him down, doing the occasional exchange. I think Paul's going to make it into a bit more of a boring fight. I think he's going to tie him up, and when he gets more tired, he's going to have a bit more success with his jab. And, like I said, I think it's going to be a messy fight. I think Paul, like I said, is going to win by unanimous decision, but it's not going to be the most thrilling of a unanimous decision win, in my opinion. It could be, but it very much could not be. And yeah, like I said, I think Paul's going to win, and perhaps that's a surprising thing. Obviously, if it was Tyson of 20, 30 years ago, Tyson would have won easily, would have steamrolled through him, but this isn't that anymore, and you can't kind of say to me that it is. Obviously, everybody's rooting for Tyson. In my opinion, I would love to see Tyson win, just to, roll back the times and see this legend of a fighter in which he is. I'm not a Jake Paul hater, but like I say, I would love to see the legend of what Tyson is. But, then who he could go on to fight, it's difficult with Jake Paul. You never really know what route he's going to go down, especially now. So, KSI, McGregor, Mayweather, Carl Froch, I don't know, the biggest of names. I'm sure he's not going to want to take a step down from the money he's probably made from this fight. I mean, even Tyson himself has said it's the biggest money fight in which he's ever been involved with. So, that's saying something, saying some of the fights in which Tyson had in his time. But yeah, you never really know where Paul's going to go next. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like it if you did, indeed like this, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.